This session is very much about the companies who have already got started on Blueprint, to try to understand a bit more, for whichever way they want to play this, how those companies got into it, how far they think they're along, was it new, was it a new thing, were they already partway on a journey anyway, and starting to understand the reality of trying to do it within a company with that real deep understanding and commitment to it. We will, as the afternoon goes on, talk a bit more about the obstacles that people face, and that's a bit of what you'll do, I think, on the tables when we're talking. And we'll probably, at the end of the session, I think, come back to the group here to say, well, when you present them with the obstacles as you see them, how would they answer that? You know, how would they deal with it? But I'm very keen to get going because we've got 4 very interesting and very different stories. So I am going to start off with Paul, who's Communications and Public Affairs within easyJet. So how far on the journey is easyJet?
Thank you. I think we're probably about a year or so in total along the journey with Blueprint. But I think for me, if you don't mind, it's more in the context of what we've tried to do in the last 5 years or so. So I was very pleased, and I promise you I didn't incentivize them in any way, that the table recognised that we are a different sort of airline to certain other airlines. But in 2010, that wasn't the case. So most of the management team at easyJet started around that time. At that point, our punctuality and reliability, which is the kind of bedrock of an airline, was really, really low. We'd lost the faith of our passengers, partly because of that. We didn't look after all of our passengers particularly well, especially those in wheelchairs who required some form of special assistance. We had to cut costs. We had this low-cost model, but we'd cut costs way too far. So we cut things that passengers, and more particularly our people, really valued. So we kind of made the crew food worse. We threatened to remove their free tea and coffee. Those tiny things that probably would have saved us low thousands, but had this massive impact on kind of morale. And so for us, for the new management team, we had to kind of fix all of those basics. So we got the operation working again. We tried to run the business with the passenger kind of at the heart of it. So we've been using terms with our people around kind of walking in our passengers' feet. So to kind of imagining if they're in that position, how they would like to be treated, to be handled. And we were innovative. We got back to our kind of innovative kind of roots. And the result of all that is we've had a very good period, and we have demonstrably differentiated ourselves from other airlines. And we're hoping that we make travel easy as well as affordable. But in doing all that, it felt to us that those were individual activities or initiatives which intuitively we knew were the right thing, but it wasn't obvious to us how they were really connecting together. And the kind of metaphor I tend to use is it felt, when Blueprint came along, Blueprint gave us, if you like, the picture on the outside of the jigsaw box. And all of a sudden it made much more sense that the individual pieces, which we knew were right, we could then begin to see how they would fit together into this overarching picture. And indeed, literally the connections between some of those became more obvious. And more particularly, the gaps that we still had in our jigsaw were much more evident. But actually what was good is that they were kind of framed. So it kind of gave us a pointer, which again, I think instinctively we knew. We knew we had to continue to improve how we look after passengers, particularly how we look after our own people, how we get engagement from our own people and our suppliers. So it kind of highlighted the things we knew we needed to do further work on. But it was, I mean, when I first met with Charles, which I think was probably about a year ago, I mean, he literally had me at hello. I mean, as soon as he started speaking, everything he said, it filled. It's that sense of we knew there was something missing. We knew we needed to kind of have some sort of process to try to work our way through it. And we knew we could get there, but we knew we needed somebody or some entity to help us. Now, the fact that Blueprint is also low cost, brackets free, clearly culturally appealed to us. But I think also the fact that actually with Blueprint, you're only as good as you make yourself. It is all about you holding a mirror up to yourself. And I think in some ways a mirror is a much more powerful weapon than a spotlight, because I think if you look at it truly, it paints a fairly unflattering, it paints a true picture of who you are. And it seemed to us that Blueprint gave us the opportunity to help us frame what we knew we needed to do and give us some support to continue on that journey. And we're now, let's say, about a year or so into it. So we've talked it through with our kind of PLC board, our management team, and it really is resonating, and we're beginning to populate it with particular initiatives and with our broader kind of management community.
I think that's very interesting because we've been having quite a lot of discussion, I think, about what gets people over the hump to really actually get really fully into, whether they call it blueprint or not, but adopting the whole purpose approach and the fears about that. And I think your point about the framework and the, not just support, but actually the sense of you're in something that you understand, that you're sort of signed up to, feels like a bit of an incentive and a drive to keep going.
Yeah, and I think events like this are very engaging and enjoyable, but I think they are really reassuring that kind of, for one thing, you're not alone in this journey, and that almost nothing any of us will face will be unique to us, and the learnings or the support or advice you can get from other people, I think, is really important. I think it feels like Blueprint is bringing people together, and across all the various sectors is a very powerful tool that they have at their disposal.
So, Brendan, a newer company.
Yes.
Tell us where have you got to?
Yes, so I'm the CEO of Flood Re, which is a new organisation that's been co-sponsored by government, backed by legislation, and the insurance industry. And if you want to have an example of an organisation that is purpose-orientated, I think we are a pretty good example, because our purpose is set out in the legislation, which of course we had a very pivotal role in shaping. And there's a line in the legislation that Flood Re's purpose is to promote the availability and affordability of flood insurance to consumers. And that's it. And that simplicity has given us a great advantage as we go about our business. We actually don't launch our operations until next month, but we have spent the last 2 years getting ready for that and have put a team together and the board of directors that will do that. That will ensure that we have got an organisation that's fit for purpose to pursue what we are there to do. And so, I've had it said to me lots and lots of times, great, a new organisation, you select your own team, you've got the opportunity to shape the culture and how it will be to be part of that team. And on a level, that's right. That is a fantastic opportunity. But of course, it's also a difficult one, because what people bring to it is, of course, they're framed by their own individual experience. And in the first few months of putting my team together, it became very clear that this was going to be one of the most fundamental challenges, was to create an atmosphere for that business to thrive in for the future. Now, I had a lot of things going for us. Firstly, the people that came to Flood Re, that wanted to work in Flood Re, were in a sense similarly orientated. They wanted to work for a business that did have a purpose. It proved to be actually one of the key attractions of wanting to be part of our team. And I looked for that in the selection processes that we went through. And that's paid great dividends. And I see now, my team talk about getting the Flood Re bug. And the amount of discretionary effort that goes on in the team that I work in and the people that work for them is quite extraordinary. And it's because they're caught in the cause of doing this purposeful thing. And so when we started to talk about the type of organisation we want to be, and the way in which we want to be perceived by others, and the choices that we have available to us to make every day about the way we behave to one another and to others, then we started to realise that we needed to find a language for that. And my chairman, Mark Hogan, who's out there somewhere, brought the idea of Blueprint to me some months ago. And it resonated immediately, similarly to you, Paul. Immediately I felt I got it, and I felt really very excited about it. I loved its simplicity, its clarity, but also its depth, its clear depth. And I slowly introduced this to my colleagues. And we drew a contrast, because most of us had spent 30 years, or thereabouts, working in a fairly traditional, conservative, risk-averse industry of insurance. And the contrast was very clear, that we had an opportunity not to be driven by the constraints of a legacy of the past, but to choose a way of describing to ourselves and to others the type of character that we wanted our organisation to have. What is it that we would want people to say about us? And we found the Blueprint absolutely incredibly helpful to that process. It gave us the beginnings of a language on which we could build our choices for the future. And that process is very much still live for us. I'd say actually that we're only a very short way into that journey, even though we've returned to the topic several times over recent months. and I'm sure that it will continue to evolve. But at least there is a framework and a set of principles that we all believe resonates well with why we wanted to do what we are now doing. And the type of organisation we want to be is then going to be a deliberate decision. And I'm fascinated by the opportunity that that journey represents for us now.
And that's made me think again about something else, which is about how people express these things. Because again, you've given a very straightforward, very clear statement of purpose.
Yes.
Which is often quite a lot harder, as you say, for companies who've been around for quite a long time.
Absolutely.
They have to rethink it. But when you were talking to Paul, I mean, you didn't describe the purpose, but you did use some very simple words. You know, the business about, you know, putting yourselves in the passenger's shoes. And I always think about Paul Feeney from Old Mutual, who said, "Would you sell this financial product to your mother?" You know, they may not be the words you use on the, you know, on the tin, as it were, but they are the words that you can use very simply to describe some of these things that are essential to this. Yeah. So, Vodafone, you've been in it a bit longer.
We have.
Like more of the easyJets are. So, do you want to describe where you
sure.
got
Well,
to?
we were really in right at the very, very beginning, before there was a blueprint. So, from our perspective, this arose from a conversation between my CEO, Vittorio Colau, and his counterpart at Unilever, Paul Polman, and Cardinal Nichols. Must have been at least 2, maybe even 3 years ago, Charles, I can't remember, quite a while ago, where in essence the conversation focused on the challenge that pretty much every business faces, certainly every large business faces, which is that we try to do good work that has a positive social impact. That's sort of by and large in our bones, and yet increasingly civil society doesn't see it that way at all. So there's an emerging gap. And for us, in essence, the blueprint addresses 2 parallel related disconnects. The first is between what a company says it does and what it actually does on the ground in reality. And then the second is between how a company thinks it deserves to be perceived and how it actually is perceived, which clearly arises from the first disconnect. That matters enormously for a global consumer brand like Vodafone, because we operate in an industry, in the mobile phone industry largely, that has a largely deserved, they're not entirely deserved, but certainly a long-running legacy of public mistrust, combined with the fact that it's very easy to switch suppliers. So a gap between the promise and the delivery is material, commercially. It matters a lot. In a sense, in our business now, we use the blueprint almost like a pre-flight checklist. So when you flick a switch, does the light go green or red? Each individual line of the blueprint, each word of text, and I should say that I was personally involved in writing the actual principles, as were a number of my colleagues. Each line of text is like an exam question, like a pre-flight checklist. They're difficult questions if you ask them honestly of yourselves. And when we started going through the exercise of analysing, are these red, amber or green when we go through each individual word, it became very interesting very quickly. So 2 examples of what we did. Quite early on, we pulled together our top 40 leaders, so the group executive plus the country chief executives and a small number of global functional leaders. And we all got in a room, we put the blueprint principles up on the wall, and we began to have a conversation about how we thought we fared. And it became quite a protracted conversation, and it became a pretty fierce conversation. Really quite fiery at times. It was a very honest and sometimes quite painful conversation. And in parallel with that, we also conducted a kind of bottom-up gap analysis, using employee feedback, using external stakeholder research, vast amounts of customer sentiment, what our customers tell us. We are not short of inputs in terms of insights from our customers. And we married the 2 up. And what became clear is that the heat map, as it were, was very unpleasant in the top left-hand corner of the principles around customers and suppliers, with some pretty uncomfortable ambers at best around some of the kind of global social impact. That then led to some concrete actions, which we have been putting into effect for a while. The first of these is a global program focused on customer excellence, rebuilding in part, or certainly extending and enhancing how we approach our customers, very much in line with your experience, from basic principles upwards. It's an enormous endeavour. It covers all of our footprint, very different markets, very different challenges. It's as much cultural as it is operational, but the operational aspect of it is pretty complicated, and it's now involving thousands of people across the company. So that's one output. The second is that we overhauled our supplier relationships. We looked at how we treated our suppliers and took some concrete steps, including a significant change to our payment terms, which had a financial impact for us, but we concluded it was the right thing to do. And the third area we moved into is a new sustainable business framework. So we have refocused the company on 3 global transformational goals over a 10-year period: women's empowerment, youth skills and jobs, energy innovation, which are 3 areas where we can align core commercial objectives that are very important for us as a business with material positive social impact at scale. The two areas absolutely align. To give you one brief example of how that would play out in practice, one subset of one of those goals is that we have set ourselves the challenge over the next 10 years of connecting an additional 100 million women to mobile and all the benefits that arise from mobile in emerging markets, over and above those that we would reach through normal marketing activity. And if anyone has worked in emerging markets, you'll know if you put a mobile phone into the hands of a woman in the countryside in India, for example, you change her life forever. It's a significant thing. But it's also 100 million customers. So hence my point about the alignment between commercial and social impact. So the blueprint is now kind of pretty much absorbed into our core business. It's as if we're now building the house and the original blueprint is safely away in a drawer. We don't talk about it as much as we do because it's effectively normalised and the concepts are operationalised. So we know what the challenges are. We've gone through that process, painful as it was. We've created the programmes to address it. We've got a long way to go, and arguably, we'll never get to the final destination. There probably isn't one. But we know what we know what we need to do.
But if you look forward, you say you've still got challenges ahead.
Yeah.
What's the biggest one that you think, oh dear, we're going to have to get to that one soon?
Well, one of the difficulties in our industry is that it's one of the most volatile and dynamic industries on the planet. 6 months is like 5 years in other sectors. So anticipating the new area of human rights challenge, the new area of commercial threat, the new area of emerging kind of social need where we're behind the curve because we don't have the skills, we don't have the people, or we don't have an understanding of the technology, makes it a particularly difficult challenge.
So trying to do that, but within the blueprint framework.
Yeah. I mean, asking ourselves the difficult questions we first asked ourselves when we came to the blueprint, which is how do we do the right thing so that people not only hear us saying we want to do the right thing, they feel it.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to this issue about the public and their perceptions, but I'm going to just let Julia come back in. Now, Julia, we've heard your sort of personal story into this, but where has Centrica gone since then?
Oh, great. So I think where this started was similarly to Matt. Sam Laidlaw had a conversation about the blueprint, and after accepting the challenge that I took the short intake of breath on, he said to me, these guys are coming to talk to me about blueprint. It's, all a bit motherhood and apple pie, really, isn't it? But I feel like you should go and have a conversation with them. And if you could come back in a few weeks' time and just let me know that, yes, we're doing all of these things, because I think we are. So I went off and I spoke to Lachlan and Charles and really sort of got to understand the depth of the societal and wisdom aspects of the principles and the framework. And very quickly had a moment of, we are not doing any of these things. And so went back to Sam and said, with all due respect, we are not doing any of these things, and we really need to think about, them in the context of the struggle that the business is having at the moment with the public perception. And if we were doing all of these things, we wouldn't be in the position that we're in front of the select committee, having a CMA investigation. The great thing that the blueprint did, and we've sort of picked up on this a couple of times, is it connected me with a network of other people, other practitioners, not who are, necessarily, signed up to the blueprint, but they've been on their own journeys. And one of those was Unilever, and they talked to me about the importance of going back to their history and their roots. And so I went and spent a couple of days in the London archives, going back to Centrica's original documents of incorporation. And what's interesting from Brendan's perspective is, you know, it was created and signed by the King in 1812, and in the original incorporation documents it was around bringing heat and light to the people of London. And it doesn't say this in a very succinct way, but my, you know, sort of interpretation was, you know, bring heat and light in the significant good of the people and we're not going to have a problem here. Which, you know, is a pretty good purpose for an energy company. The unforeseen consequence was climate change. And, you know, 200 years later, we're still living with an energy system that was created 200 years ago. And we're not going to change that overnight. It's going to take time. But I think what Blueprint did for us was it asked us some different and unusual questions about the type of energy system that people would like for the future, and the fact that they felt out of control in relation to energy, and they didn't feel empowered, they didn't feel that they had a choice, and therefore energy was being done to them. It dropped in terms of its value, and, you know, I did a study while I was in the US. People spend less than 6 minutes a year thinking about energy. They spend 13 hours a year on hold. So, you know, this fundamental thing to our lives that we all use every single day, we don't think about it. We don't think about where it comes from. It just comes out the wall. Then we receive a bill and it costs a lot of money and we then don't like it. You know, the reality is we spend less money on energy every day than we do on cups of coffee. So when we put it into that context, you know, where does our anger come from? So, you know, it's not a natural business problem that we're seeking to resolve. So similarly to Vodafone, we did a gap analysis, and the process that we went through was a very similar one. We went to employees, to our future leaders that had been exposed to big questions in the world. Many of them are in the room today, which is great. And to our executive. And you know, our executive were kind of like, why are you asking me these questions about relationships and what relationships are important? Which, you know, gave you a bit of an insight in of itself. And what that did was it gave us a narrowing of focus in terms of what did we really want to be known for. And so it was around customer empowerment and innovation. And I think Lachlan said it earlier, you know, you've got an energy system that's 200 years old, you've got an organisation that's 200 years old, it's not going to change overnight and you can't change it all at once, so you have to pick a place to start. And I think what our Chief Executive, Ian Conn, has done is he's placed 2 significant bets and he's committed £1.2 billion of investment to connected homes and distributed energy and power, which talks to the customer empowerment and customer innovation, as we actually reduce the amount of investment in the existing core business, which is exploration and production and energy supply. So, you know, there's an intent there, and a big intent and a big goal of we're going to transform this energy system and we're going to become a different company that is on the side of customers and create those decisions. I think the point is that this all sounds really obvious, and you'd sit there going, well, if I was designing that, of course you'd do that. Why wouldn't you? But as an organisation, what we were known for was financial performance and financial discipline. And when you're singularly focused on financial performance and financial discipline, you forget about all these other things. And so actually having a way to have some perspective is really, really important. And I think the cautionary point from a Centrica perspective, and I know many of my colleagues are thinking about at the moment, is if it's in our DNA to be singularly focused, and we're now going to become singularly focused on customers, how do we ensure that we don't drop the other bits? And I think that's the forward play that we need to keep an eye on, that we don't, think about that differently. And I think that having been now been working with other companies and getting some other different perspectives, I think that is a big challenge for large corporations they are machine-like and they're very good at doing very specific things. And so one of the pieces of work that Blueprint's been doing is working with SMEs and looking at the dilemmas that they face and how they face these problems, which actually we found is equally as applicable to large corporations as it is to small ones. So horrendous plug, Barbara, but if anybody would like to see that work, then we're happy to share it as well.
Good. With that, I want to turn to this question about public perception, because part of the Blueprint's origins were very much in the position that actually the private sector is not trusted by society, and that's not just in the UK. It has a very low rating all across the world. Governments do too. You're not sort of on your own, but it is down there. And part of the whole issue about the licence to operate in society requires that there is public trust. Now, so a part of this is how do we make that change? How do we get the trust? And I've always been saying throughout, as Charles has said, throughout the work on Blueprint, unless the public knows this is going on or can see something happening, it's not going to make any difference to trust. So I guess my question is, how the hell is the public going to know this is happening? And I was going to let Julia carry on this, because if you're changing to customer empowerment, are you going to tell the customer what they are going to be able to expect so they can hold you to account for it? Or are you going to do it and hope the customers sort of gradually notice? Or what's the way, what's the path?
Well, I think in the example of Centrica specifically, there's almost sort of 3 intervention points. One, the CMA has come out with a set of recommendations that we will need to act upon, and those are in customers' interests. I think we've been very public about the change of our purpose, which is to satisfy the changing needs of customers. And that's, everything we do is focused on that, and that is in the narrative. And I think the other thing that we're doing is the way in which we are now talking publicly to all of our stakeholders, the engagements that we're having, is a conversation about what is fair, transparent, and our customers are asking for. So we're now advocating on behalf of customers and making decisions about which businesses we will be in on that feedback.
And will we know about trust because they will stop walking away, which they don't do adequately, you see what I mean?
Yes.
How are we going to know that there's any change or the public have seen any change? Or how are you going to know?
I think it's an emerging question, and I think that we'll see that in the retention. We'll see it in especially in our North American business where it's much more transparent. We'll see it in our net promoter scores, but we'll also see it in the behaviours that our people have in relation to our customers and the types of relationships that they are having in the contacts that they have. And we're looking to increase the number of touch points that we have with customers. But we are at the start of this journey of transformation, so we'll have more products and services being delivered as we start to transition this energy system.
Matt, how do your public perception?
So we pretty quickly got to the point of realisation that words are easy, actions are harder, and actions that people actually believe are harder still. So our sort of guiding philosophy is do, tell, not tell, do.
Yeah.
Do it first, make it real, operationalise it, to my point earlier, and then tell people, you may have noticed over the last few months that this thing has changed, that the network is suddenly faster, broader, that actually your bill's a bit different, that this app that we've given to you does all this cool stuff that's really, really helpful so you can control what your family is doing. But never pre-trail. Because our industry, unfortunately, is littered with enormous promises that are just not matched by reality. And that's part of the issue that we are dealing with.
Yeah. And how about easyJet?
Yeah, I mean, without saying the obvious, you can't buy trust, you have to earn it. So I think one of the problems in the past has been, whether it be through producing wonderful CSR reports, I mean, you know, people's experience of you determines what they think about you. So you have to kind of, for it to be real, I mean, anyone can write a great CSR report. It's a very different thing to run a company genuinely sustainably. So I think with this, that one of the things that appeals to me about Blueprint is it absolutely does force you to, or encourages you to run your business in a better way. And the acid test will be, as a consumer or a user of our products or services, do people think we are doing a better job? And for us, when we've tried to encapsulate things in, so we have a passenger charter, but it's got things like, you know, we will be open and upfront. We'll see things from your perspective. So it's not saying we'll be on time 85% of the time. It's about attitudes, or it's about commitments that will inform how we do what we do in a volatile, ever-changing sort of world.
Yeah.
But ultimately, Blueprint will work if people think that the businesses who signed up to it are actually doing a better job.
And Brendan, are you going to tell them that all the rest of the insurance industry was really rubbish and this new thing is wonderful?
Well, I think the fact that we exist at all is a credit to the industry. But my sense of this is that from where we are today in our efforts to launch Flood Re, we're going through a process of trying to educate and create awareness amongst consumers about what we are and what we're there to do. When one does that, though, there has to be a balance, and what we try and judge every day is what is the right balance and where do you set the expectations, and there are limits to those expectations. And I think if we overpromise, then that just creates risk for us. And so having a consciousness of that and being realistic about the extent and the speed of success and the anticipation of that is vitally important. But I could just for a moment shift on to other partners. We have very strong stakeholder groups in government, in insurance industry, with some of our key suppliers. The Blueprint has a role there for us too, and the way that they react to us is just as important as the way that customers react to us, and we want to pay as much attention to that as well. The Blueprint's been very useful in doing that.
I want to get some questions, but can I ask one I don't want a long answer to any of this, but in any of your companies, if something dramatically wrong happened, like VW, that became very publicly obvious, would you all get out there and say, yes, we take that on, we are doing X, Y, and Z to put it right? Really, absolutely. Would you do that?
Yeah.
No hiding is what I'm...
Well, we would have done before the Blueprint, I hope. And any company that thinks that it would not do that will see its value destroyed.
Yeah.
But yet that happens repeatedly.
And their value is being destroyed.
Yeah. But why don't they learn?
Is anyone from VW in the room? Ask them.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I only asked that question because in my Oxfam time, obviously I saw some of the most egregious things that companies did internationally that they would never have done in the UK often. But when those things came out, well, they were very loath to let those out in the public domain.
I mean, it's a complicated topic. The short answer: you've got human behaviour, you've got willful blindness in some areas, you've got the corporate entity not knowing, panic, often, lack of information, and a fast-moving story, particularly now, is an issue. But the fundamental truth remains, to come touching a bit back on what we talked about earlier, that if you take, in my industry, the most valuable companies in the world, the top 10 most valuable companies in telecoms and technology, and you overlay the top 10 most trusted companies in telecoms and technology, it's more or less the same list. So if you break that bond, you destroy value.
Great. So the only thing I was going to add is it does seem to Blueprint taps into, I think, a general feeling that there's a kind of right way of doing things, and alternative ways, wrong ways, different ways. And clearly the Volkswagen thing, somebody somewhere was making a decision that was the wrong thing to do. And I think what you want to try to do is create a culture where they don't feel under pressure to do the wrong thing, far less that it's kind of legitimised by sort of senior management. So you've got an open culture that allows people to report, say, actually, I'm being asked to do something I'm not comfortable with. But it's at its simplest, it's pretty obvious that rigging those results is not the right thing to do. So you've got to try to create a culture that neither allows it to happen or encourages it, and then has mechanisms which try to stop it.
Yeah.